Montana Territory, July 1876. The sun sinks over the dry plains. A lonely cowboy, scarred by battles of life, watches a widow struggle with her 2 children on the dusty road. He whispers to himself, "She needs shelter, and I need a family." But no one in the town knows his painful secret. He cannot have children of his own. Ethan Cole was 36, a strong and respected rancher in the wide Montana Territory. Known for his acres of fertile land, yet cursed with a house that echoed with silence. No laughter, no small footsteps, only the lonely creak of wooden floors reminding him of the family he would never have. And while neighbors admired his success, whispers of his secret infertility made him carry a weight heavier than any cattle herd. But across the dusty street of Miles City in July 1876 walked Clara Hayes, just 28, her eyes dim with grief, her dress torn by struggle, a widow left homeless after the brutal Sioux raids that claimed her husband, clutching 2 hungry children by the hand as they wandered through town like shadows of the life they once knew, searching for hope, unaware that destiny was quietly drawing her path toward Ethan, a man who could offer shelter but yearned for love. Ethan watched Clara move through the crowded street with her children, her fragile steps pulling at something deep inside him. For while his ranch stretched over miles of open land and his barns overflowed with cattle, all of it felt hollow without the sound of family. And though neighbors praised his fortune, he carried the invisible wound of a man who could never pass his name to sons of his own. And as Clara's boy tugged on her hand, asking quietly for bread, Ethan's chest tightened, knowing no rancher in Montana would ever hire a widow with 2 little mouths to feed. Yet he could not bring himself to step forward. For every time his eyes met hers, shame sealed his lips like iron chains, and the town's cruel whispers rang louder in his head. Voices saying a cowboy without heirs was no true man, that his wealth meant nothing without blood to inherit it. And so he stood in silence, torn between desire and dread, while Clara clung to hope that never came, her children staring at bakery windows they could not afford, and Ethan's heart thundered with the truth that he had more than enough to shelter them, yet less than nothing to give in the way the world demanded. His nights restless with the haunting thought of what it would mean to offer her safety without revealing the secret that branded him unworthy. For love and shame wrestled inside him like wild horses in a storm. And every passing day the distance between them grew heavier, until the burden threatened to crush him. And the sight of Clara's weary eyes carved deeper than any wound he had taken in years of hard work under the burning sun. The storm raged over Miles City, wind howling against the church steeple as rain lashed down in cold sheets. And Ethan stepped into the dim glow of the porch lantern, where Clara huddled with her children, her arms wrapped tight around them as thunder cracked across the sky, her face pale yet defiant against the night, and for a moment he stood frozen, caught between fear and courage, until the weight of silence broke inside him and the words poured out. Not gentle, not rehearsed, but raw and trembling. "You want a home and I need children. Marry me and together we will survive." And the sound of his own voice struck him harder than the storm, because he had spoken aloud the secret that lived only in his chest. And Clara lifted her head slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief as the rain slid across her cheeks, though she could not tell if it was water or tears. And she searched his face for cruelty, but found only desperation carved into the lines of a man who had fought loneliness too long. Yet her heart twisted, uncertain if this was kindness or a bargain dressed as mercy. While her daughter clung tighter to her shawl and the boy shivered under the crack of thunder, their small faces reminding her that choice had never belonged to her alone. And Ethan's hand shook as he held his hat against the storm, fearing she might spit at his words, fearing she might walk away and leave him chained forever to silence. But instead Clara whispered nothing, only stood there trembling, her gaze locked to his. The world drowned in the roar of rain, until the children whimpered and she pressed them close, torn between pride and survival. And Ethan's chest burned with shame at the bluntness of his proposal, yet he could not take it back, for it had been carved from his very soul, and the air between them grew heavy, thicker than the storm, until time itself seemed to pause. And in that fragile stillness, destiny hung like a blade, waiting for her to answer, waiting to decide if his empty house would forever remain silent, or if the widow with weary eyes would step across his threshold and turn it into a home. And though no words passed her lips that night, the silence carried more weight than any vow, leaving Ethan haunted, soaked to the bone, his heart pounding with both dread and hope, as he realized that her hesitation was not rejection, It was the pause before a choice that could bind two broken lives together in ways neither of them had ever dared to imagine. Clara's soft voice finally broke the silence of that stormy night, her acceptance trembling like a candle in the wind. And from that moment on, their lives were bound together. Yet as dawn lit the streets of Miles City, whispers spread faster than wildfire, neighbors leaning over fences and merchants pausing in their shops to trade sharp words, sneering at the thought of a young widow tying herself to a man rumored to be barren, their judgment cruel and unrelenting. And though Ethan kept his head high, every hushed remark cut deep, reminding him of the one truth he could never change, while Clara endured her own trial, battling doubts that slipped into her mind at night when the house creaked and shadows stretched across the walls, wondering if she had chosen love or simply survival. But as the days turned into weeks, Ethan's quiet strength began to fill the spaces left empty by her grief, his steady hands repairing fences and mending roofs while also setting aside food for her children before himself. And though the little ones at first kept their distance, their eyes wary of the stranger now living under the same roof, small moments began to soften the walls around their hearts, like the evening when Ethan carved a wooden horse for the boy and left it wordlessly on the table, or the night when he rocked the youngest to sleep, as Clara's weary body finally rested for the first time in months. And slowly, without fanfare, without force, the words slipped from their lips, fragile but real. "Pa!" A sound that struck Ethan harder than any insult the town could throw. For in that single syllable, the silence of his house was broken, replaced with something he thought he would never hold. Yet even as hope grew inside those wooden walls, doubt lingered like a shadow at the door, because every time he walked into town, eyes followed him, voices hissed behind him, and his pride fought against the venom of men who measured worth only in blood. And Clara too wrestled with her own fear, questioning if her heart could truly trust a man whose proposal had been born of need rather than romance. Yet each night when she watched him sit at the edge of the bed, shoulders bent with exhaustion, his gaze always drifting to the children as if they were the only light guiding him through the darkness, she felt the stirrings of a bond that neither gossip nor shame could undo. And though the town waited for them to stumble, their home grew stronger, built not on wealth or legacy, but on the fragile courage of two souls learning to believe in one another against all odds. The first snow of winter had barely settled across the ranch when shadows moved at the edge of the tree line, bandits hungry for cattle and coin creeping closer under the pale moon, their boots crunching over frozen ground, and Clara, rousing at the faint sound of hoofbeats, pressed her children against the wall as fear surged through her chest, while Ethan, already awake, pulled his rifle from its place by the door, his jaw tight with resolve, his breath rising like smoke in the frigid air, and without hesitation he stepped onto the porch, the wind biting at his face as he stood alone against the dark figures spreading across his land, voices snarling threats that promised to strip away everything he had fought to build. Yet his stance never faltered, because behind those wooden walls waited the family he had claimed as his own. And when the first shot cracked through the silence, he fired back with the precision of a man who had lived his whole life on the edge of survival, forcing the intruders to scatter. But still they pressed harder, circling the barn and pushing toward the house, their shouts echoing through the frozen night. And Clara, heart-pounding, clutched the children close, tears stinging her eyes as she prayed he would not fall. Because in that moment, she understood it was never the land, never the wealth, but the fire in his soul that gave them safety. And as she caught sight of him through the window, standing unshaken against men who outnumbered him 3-1, she realized with piercing clarity that true fatherhood was not measured by blood, but by sacrifice. And when a bandit broke past the fence, charging toward the porch, Ethan met him head-on, wrestling him to the ground despite the blow of cold steel against his side, his cry swallowed by the storming wind. Yet he rose again, staggering but unbroken, firing a final shot that sent the raiders fleeing into the darkness, their retreat swallowed by the snow, leaving the ranch scarred but still standing. And Clara rushed out into the night, her shawl whipping in the wind as she dropped to his side, her hands trembling as they touched his face, the frost mixing with the warmth of her tears. And in that desperate silence, with her children clinging to her skirts and the sky still heavy with smoke, she whispered through sobs the truth she had been too afraid to speak, that love was not bound to flesh or blood, but to the courage of a man who would risk everything to protect those he called his own. And Ethan, bleeding but alive, met her eyes with a weary smile that held more strength than any victory. For in that instant the weight of his shame finally shattered, replaced by the unshakable bond of a family forged not by birth but by choice. By spring of 1877, the snow melted into rivers of life, and the ranch stood stronger than ever. Its fences mended, its barns filled, and its rooms alive with voices that once belonged only to silence. And though Ethan bore the scars of that brutal winter, he carried them with pride, because each mark told the story of a man who had given everything to protect what truly mattered, while Clara, standing by his side, saw not the wealthy rancher the town gossiped about, but the man whose courage had turned despair into hope, and whose steady heart had given her children a father they could finally trust. And when she whispered softly, "You gave us a home, and we gave you a family," Ethan's eyes filled with a peace he had never known. For at last he understood that legacy was not measured in blood, but in love, not in heirs of his body, but in the lives he chose to guide. And as the prairie winds carried the sound of children's laughter across the wide Montana sky, the lesson of their story became clear, that sometimes family is not born but built, not claimed by fate but chosen by the heart. And now I ask you, do you believe true family is written in blood or in love? Share your thoughts below. And if this story touched you, then like, share, and subscribe to keep the spirit alive. And for more unforgettable journeys of the old frontier, watch more videos at Western Stories.